Meeting of Minds Throughout Times, the podcast where we connect voices from the past, present, and future to discuss key social issues across generations. I'm your host, Tejasvi. Today's episode tackles an often overlooked topic: how gender and caste intertwine to create layers of oppression for a certain group of women. In India, caste and gender discrimination converge, making life especially difficult for women from marginalized caste who face double discrimination both as a woman and as a member of a lower social group. One major challenge in addressing this issue is the society's refusal to fully acknowledge these overlapping forms of oppression. Systems, whether legal, social, or cultural, often fail to recognize or respond to crimes against oppressed caste women. Furthermore, the society tends to expect specific emotional reactions from victims. If a woman doesn't exhibit visible distress after trauma, her experience might be doubted, creating yet another barrier to justice. Caste identity deeply influences how sexual violence is perceived. A dangerous belief persists that dominant caste men are incapable of committing such crimes, especially against marginalized caste women. This misconception stems from an outdated social hierarchy that falsely places dominant caste individual on a moral pedestal. As a result, crimes against oppressed caste women are often ignored or dismissed, while crimes involving a dominant caste woman receive quicker recognition and justice. The concept of honor also plays a crucial role. The society often views rape as a crime that takes away a woman's honor. However, women from oppressed castes are unjustly seen as impure from the start, making society less likely to regard violence against them as a serious violation. This mindset not only dehumanizes these women but also blocks their access to justice. In summary, the intersection of caste and gender creates severe layered discrimination, often left unaddressed by the society. Acknowledging these unique struggles is essential for justice and meaningful change towards equality. Joining me today are four reporters from different time periods who will explore how the cases like the Hathras tragedy exposes systemic barriers faced by Dalit women. They will discuss how these injustices reinforce the myth of ideal victim and normalize sexual violence. Together, we'll examine the historical, legal, and cultural forces that perpetuate these cycles of oppression and discuss what must change within India's legal framework. Stay tuned as we journey together to understand the collision of caste, gender, and explore the paths towards a more just society. Ms. Anushi was one of the first reporters to cover this case back in her time. It would only be wise to call her to tell us about the details of this case.
Absolutely, Tejasvi. All throughout my career as a reporter, this was the case that scarred my heart and truly opened my eyes to the reality of the Indian justice system. I remember that day vividly. It was one of those rare afternoons where I actually had a moment to myself, which was soon interrupted as my informant, a local contact in Uttar Pradesh, called me. I picked up, not expecting much more than the usual update. But the moment I heard his voice, I knew something was wrong. He started telling me about a girl. She was young, maybe still in her teens, from a small Dalit family in Hathras. The family had been out in the fields that morning, cutting grass, when something horrific happened. The girl, he said, had been working alongside her mother and her brother. Then, out of nowhere, four men from one of the most dominant castes in that area, the Thakurs, appeared. They dragged her away by her dupatta into the fields. At this point, I already knew where this was going, but I couldn't bring myself to believe it. The mother, she heard her daughter scream. By the time she found her, the unimaginable had already happened. And they took her to the police stations, but the officers there, they refused to file a report.
Can you imagine that? In that moment, when a mother is fighting for justice for her daughter, the system just goes ahead and shuts the door in her face.
Only after the girl was able to name one of her attackers did the police finally react. The first arrest came with an FIR registered under Section 354 of the Indian Penal Code, a charge dealing with the intent to outrage a woman's modesty. The gravity of what had been done to her went beyond any legal term. And yet, all I could do was listen as my informant told me the facts, one after the other, as if it was just another day in India. I remember the frustrating sequence of events that followed. After the police finally agreed to file an FIR, there was yet another delay.
Thanks to the technological tools available in 2050, the process of filing charge sheets has become much more convenient. I feel this might have made a difference in the case.
They did not rush the victim to the hospital right away. Instead, she was taken to a local primary health center later that evening. This delay wasn't just a logical hiccup. It was caused by the initial refusal to take her case seriously.
Oh, I also heard that the hospital at first refused to do the medical test for rape because the relevant charge wasn't added by the police.
A few days later, on the 19th of September, the victim was able to give her statement. She named Sandeep as one of the attackers. And finally, the police added an attempt to murder charge under Section 307 of the Indian Penal Code. Sandeep was arrested after that, but it did not stop there. By the 21st of September, the victim provided further details. She stood in front of the magistrate and bravely named out not just Sandeep but also Ravi, Ramu, and Lavkush as her attackers. With this, the police finally charged all four with gang rape and murder.
I also heard that the initial investigating officer didn't even add the charges of gang rape. It was only after he was suspended that those charges were included.
On September 22 of 2020, they finally performed the first swab test to confirm the sexual assault, but by then a full week had passed, making it nearly impossible to gather any solid evidence like sperm traces. The delays were not just careless, they were devastating. Sadly, the victim passed away on the morning of September 29, 2020. Then, in a shocking turn, her body was forcibly taken by the police and cremated at 2:30 a.m. the next day, without her family's consent.
Why did they decide to cremate the body at 2:30 in the night? That's such an odd timing.
The state's explanation only fueled the anger. A special investigation team was formed, but the damage was already done. On the 1st of October, the Allahabad High Court took suo motu cognizance of the case. Just days later, on October 6th, the UP government filed an affidavit justifying the police's actions. They claimed the crime had been registered immediately and insisted that cremating the body at night was necessary to avoid chaos. They even went so far as to say that the victim's family was present during the cremation, but the truth felt hollow. The signs are disheartening, and I can't shake the feeling that the system may once again fail the very individuals it was meant to protect.
As Anushri has explained how the police and administration failed the victim, we now have Mr. Akhil to discuss the very judgment of this case which has come out today.
Well, Anushri, your fears have come true. The justice system has failed the victim yet again. As a legal reporter, I could see this judgment coming from miles away. When the CBI filed a charge sheet in the court of Special Judge B.D. Bharati against the accused, they were charged for the provisions under IPC and SC/ST Act. Well, fast forward to today, after more than 2 years of legal back and forth, the court finally delivered its verdict. Out of the 4 accused, only one was found guilty but not for rape or murder. Instead, he was convicted of culpable homicide not amounting to murder under Section 304 of the IPC. The other 3 accused were acquitted, with the court deciding that the evidence just did not hold up to prove that they were involved in rape or gang rape. So, how did the court reach its conclusion? Well, Sandeep's conviction mainly rested on 2 things: the post-mortem medical reports and the testimony from the victim's mother. The court also took into account of the victim's dying declaration. However, they ruled that although she tragically died after struggling for 8 days, there wasn't enough proof to show that her death was an intentional murder. Instead, they concluded that her injuries resulted from being dragged during the attack. As for the other 3 accused, the court felt the evidence wasn't strong enough to prove their involvement, so all of the charges against them were dropped. The role of the local police, meanwhile, was questionable to say the least. In the beginning, they didn't even charge the accused with rape or gang rape. Instead, they went with Section 354 of the IPC, which deals with outraging a woman's modesty, which is a far less serious charge.
Yeah, well, how can you speak of the rape charges when there is clear tampering of evidence?
Exactly, and it was only after the public erupted in anger and pressure mounted on them that they finally had the rape charges. But I feel by then a lot of damage had already been done.
There was also a massive delay in collecting forensic evidence, 11 whole days. And any expert will tell you that forensic samples should ideally be collected within 72 to 90 hours, and waiting that long meant key evidence was lost. And the forensic methods used were also outdated. Shockingly, the court leaned on the FSL report, which didn't find any semen on the victim to rule out rape. But the semen method has been criticized since a long time by the medical professionals. The court also noted that if the victim had indeed been gang raped by 4 men, she would have named all of them from the start. But that did not happen. Well, the CBI pushed back on this, saying that the victim and her family, being Dalit, were ignored and disrespected by the police during the initial investigation. Had they been treated with the respect and attention they deserved, the victim might have felt safe enough to disclose more details right away, and the outcome could have been way different. This case overall highlights the deep-rooted issues in India's criminal justice system, particularly for Dalit women. From the very step of filing of the FIR to the investigation itself, systemic discrimination seemed to be ever present in the entire process.
The court said that there was a chance that political motives might have tutored the victim to name the other 3 accused alongside Sandeep, and that's why her dying declaration wasn't even given much significance.
Exactly. In cases like these, where Dalit women are victims of sexual violence, their experiences are often overshadowed by larger political agendas. This creates a really toxic environment where the truth can get distorted.
In the case of Satyama Dubey vs. Union of India, popularly known as the Hathras case, the court's skepticism over the victim's changing statement suggests they felt like she had been coached. I would like to hear more about Ms. Advitya's thought on this judgment.
Well, why wouldn't the judiciary be skeptical? One of the biggest issues we're seeing in the Hathras case today and in many other cases of sexual violence against Dalit women is this idea of ideal victimhood. As Disha Wadekar explains, courts often expect survivors to behave in a certain way, like crying openly, showing physical trauma, or being visibly distressed. If they don't, their credibility just gets questioned. And today's judgment reflects exactly that. The court doubted the victim's changing statements, implying her testimony was influenced because the case became so politicized. It's like they expect a perfect victim to immediately give a detailed, vivid account of the assault, and if she doesn't, she's not believed. This completely ignores the layers of discrimination she faced as a Dalit woman, from the police delaying the FIR to the flawed forensic process. The system failed her right from the start. As Tejasvi explained the concept of double discrimination earlier, Dalit women face both gender-based violence and caste-based oppression, which makes it so much harder for them to get justice. If we look back at the Khailanji case in 2006, the discrimination is just as clear. In that case, members of a Dalit family were brutally murdered by dominant caste men. The mother and daughter were found naked and mutilated, but rape charges couldn't be proven. The court said that there wasn't enough evidence despite how their bodies had clearly been violated. It's similar to Hathras, where the courts seem to doubt or ignore what's right in front of them. The same harmful pattern plays out here. Caste biases shape how violence against Dalit women is treated by the justice system. This idea of ideal victimhood runs deep in our society. As Wadekar points out, the courts still expect victims to conform to Brahminical standards of virtue and chastity, which are rooted in ancient texts like Manusmriti. Dalit women are seen as lacking this so-called virtue, and therefore they're treated as less deserving of justice. Look at the Hathras case today. The main accused was only convicted of culpable homicide, not rape. That just shows how deep these biases still run. And the defense lawyer is confident the convicted will get bail soon, since he's been cleared of the most serious charges. It's honestly just a mockery of our justice system.
You know, today, the sister-in-law of the victim went to court to listen to the judgment, and she overheard lawyers discussing how the verdict had spared them of embarrassment. Naak kaatne se bach gaye. We have been saved from dishonor. Another man said, did they think we'll sacrifice 4 of our boys for the sake of that niche, jati, oppressed caste girl?
Exactly. This is what the people who are a part of the judicial system had to say. It's very clear that this issue is as much of a societal issue as it is a legal one. Also, today's judgment sends a dangerous message. It will normalize victim blaming and will make survivors, especially from marginalized communities, even more hesitant to come forward. In a country where the stigma against survivors and underreporting of sexual violence are already huge issues, this is incredibly troubling. We've seen this bias before in cases like Mathura's gang rape and Banwari Devi's case. Mathura, an Adivasi girl, was raped by policemen, but the Supreme Court acquitted the accused, arguing that she didn't resist enough, so it must have been consensual.
You know, the defense lawyer said that the victim and the accused were in a relationship, and apparently the victim's family were just framing him to get revenge.
Exactly. So following the Mathura precedent, if the accused and victim were in a relationship, then the assumption is that it must have been consensual, right? Because apparently, if she didn't resist enough, it couldn't have been rape. Even in Banwari Devi's case, the court dismissed the charges, stating that dominant caste men couldn't possibly rape an oppressed caste woman. These decisions are clear examples of how caste and gender intersect to deny the acknowledgement of atrocities committed against these sections of society. In Hathras, this bias is again very evident. The court acquitted most of the accused, citing doubts over the victim's testimony and the lack of forensic evidence due to the delayed investigations.
Despite the crimes committed, 3 of the accused have returned to the village and now live in close proximity to the victim's family. Meanwhile, the victim's family remains confined to their home, living in a state of constant fear and surveillance.
And on top of that, the compensation and house that the family was promised after the victim's death still hasn't been given to them. And you know what the state government's excuse is? They're claiming it's not mandatory for the chief minister to fulfill the promise of compensation made by him. And that since the family wasn't financially dependent on the victim, so they shouldn't be getting a government job. The bias seen in the Hathras judgment is just the latest in a long line of failures and shows how the fight for justice for Dalit women is far from over. Today's judgment clearly showcases how for Dalit women, justice isn't just delayed, it's often denied. Because they can never be the ideal victim the system demands. And that's the deeper issue we need to address.
चारों गलत पकड़े गए थे।
आप कह रहे हो निर्दोषी थे?
निर्दोष सही है, निर्दोष कहीं का नहीं। वो सभी निर्दोष है। हमारे आसपास तुम किसी गांव में पूछ लो, सब निर्दोषी बताएंगे वो बच्चा।
गलत ही फंसाए वो तो।
गलत फंसाया है?
हाँ।
क्यों फंसाया गया उन्हें?
अब ये क्या पता है हमें।
अभी यहाँ के जो सर्व समाज के लोग हैं वो आरोपियों के पक्ष में खड़े हैं, आज भी खड़े हैं, वो पहले से भी थे।
कौन सा इंजाम लड़की ने लगाया?
परिवार ने जो लगाया।
हाँ, वो सब झूठे हैं।
झूठे हैं।
सब बेकार झूठे हैं।
I genuinely hope the society has progressed, but we can't say for certain. To help us address that, we have Mahathi with us, joining from the future to shed light on what lies ahead of us.
Is there a protocol for rape victims to follow post the incident which is written in the law that I am not aware of? 30 years ago, only the chaste, innocent, and inconsolable prosecutrix who has done everything in her power to resist the crime against her was the one who deserved justice. Or at least, this was the prevailing assumption of the court before issuing a verdict.
In a country where free trial is assured even to the accused, it is surprising that the victim continues to remain helpless if she does not fit into the required description.
Nearly 20% of women in India belong to oppressed classes and thus also find themselves at another intersection of class, and I believe this is often downplayed.
It is not just the limited access to resources that stops their journey towards justice. The crimes against them begin with society's failure to acknowledge their suffering. In the judgment, despite evidence supporting the victim's claims, the court suggested a lack of intent to harm. However, the true perpetrators extend beyond the individuals directly involved in the crime. I do believe that the persons guilty for the crime are not just Ravi, Ramu, Lavkush, and Sandeep, but it is us as a society, as we have continued to make such problems an arena to fight out the us versus them rather than making it our own problem. Sexual control of women is central to this continuation of caste and gender, or is referred to in academia as Brahmanical patriarchy. This allows the said dominant class men to dominate and enjoy and establish such privileges on the oppressed groups of women. The uninterrupted access to exploitation of Dalit women has still not stopped. By burdening women with the sole responsibility of upholding a nebulous concept of honor, these women are unfairly blamed when this honor is perceived to be compromised. Dalit women here are blamed for lacking caste purity from the onset. Even when faced with severe violence, mainstream feminists often fail to recognize these crimes as genuine acts of violence. The Hathras incident of intersectional violence remains a stain on India's legal system. Although it has been 3 decades since the judgment, the silence of the court, coupled with the mishandling of the case by the authorities, continues to shock legal scholars. As mentioned, the PAA's effectiveness has been seriously hindered by overly burdensome requirements, making it a difficult provision to utilize. While amendments in 2016 aim to address these issues, it is important to note that this alone has not fully resolved the problem of discrimination and violence against marginalized communities. From my vantage point, it is evident that the justice system at the end failed to adequately address the gravity of the crime, thus highlighting the systemic issues plaguing India's judicial system. A study by the Center for Dalit Rights revealed that now only 25% of the women who are Dalits are victims of sexual violence. I am therefore hopeful that a legal and societal perspective on this issue will soon be developed that not only involves a comprehensive legislation, but also involves tailoring of the judicial process as per the unique experiences of Dalit women. Dalit women often do not fit into the societal mold of an ideal victim, which hinders their ability to access justice from the outset. Ignoring this problem perpetuates the same cycle of oppression. To address this issue, we must challenge the deeply ingrained societal structures that marginalize Dalit women by expanding our understanding of justice and recognizing the unique experiences of Dalit women. By doing this, we can work towards creating a more equitable and a just society.
This really underscores how for Dalit women, justice isn't just delayed, it's often denied. Thank you all for listening to this eye-opening discussion. It's clear that addressing the intersection of caste and gender in sexual violence cases is crucial for creating a more just society. To our listeners, remember the change starts with awareness. Let's keep these conversations going and work towards a society where justice is truly blind to caste and gender. This has been Meeting of Minds to Our Times. I'm Tejasvi signing off. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep fighting for justice.